Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today is Father's Day. First and foremost, shout out to all the men out there holding it down, doing what they can, being a good representation for what they know about themselves so far. In addition to that, also a shout out to the men doing it for the sake of kids that aren't even yours. I see you. Today, we're going to do something a little different. No script, no analysis, no react. Just something to quickly talk about. Hopefully quickly. If it's not quick, suck it up. If it ends up being long, come on now. Stick around. You ain't got nothing to do. Let's just get through this. The things that I wanted to emphasize is not because it's Father's Day. I think these are things that I could say basically on any day of the week, any day of the month, any day of the year. But there is a bit of a crisis. Fathers have been dismantled. It is almost discouraged based off the cultures that we display, pursue, impulse, short term. None of these things provide any emphasis on the idea of sticking around, being around, commitment, loyalty, and sacrificing things on a basis of upraising something that is a greater representation of who you are at the time. I don't think that we have a society that's built for that anymore. And so we naturally have to go against the grain to be representation of these things. And that's mothers included. Naturally, June being June, which I'll get back around to. There's a reason why I'm emphasizing men today. So women, you got to take a back seat on this one, but I'll bring it up every now and then. I'm going to start with a little bit of story time. I spent this last week trying to help a close buddy of mine, get through his loss of his father. I drove quite a bit to be there for the funeral yesterday. Spent as much as I could with him. And in those moments of grief and in those moments of loss, you start to think about not only what you have, but what life is. And if it's just you ending up in a box. Or if it's about who's around you when you're in the box. I'm going to preface this with my dad is also someone I've looked up to my entire life. I'm taller than him now, and I've been taller than him for a while. I've gone through my fair share of struggles, hardships, pretty depressing moments, a lot of failure. And still I do. Wasn't always the case. As a kid, we don't understand much. All we know is if we have presence or absence. And in the hard-working traditional family, there's a lot of absence. And that's not quite the same as a missing father. If anything, it fosters a different outcome. And I don't know about anybody else, but feel free to share your experiences in the comments down below. But for me, because there was such an absence, anytime there was a presence, I felt the need to perform. I did so because without being able to communicate these things, as a kid growing up and having an older brother that I was constantly in competition with, 3 years older, didn't change the fact that I was in competition. I had this desperate need for that presence. I wanted him around. And I didn't understand why he was gone. But obviously, in hindsight, we got to work. We got to pay the bills. And we got to do what we can to provide for our family, especially if it's mostly a traditional household. But as kids, how could we know that? How do we know what that absence means? To us, maybe it's taken personal. And sure, we'll have a mother that consoles us and tells us otherwise. No, he's just busy. He's got stuff to do. But what does that sound like to the mind of a child? It sounds like there's more important things than being here with me. To that extent, that's what can easily be drawn. Now, that doesn't mean every child has a pessimistic view, but in the essence of my childhood, it did. Why wasn't he here? Why wasn't he around? Where is he now? And why is that more important? So when it came down to the moments of him being around, I decided, or I came to this subconscious realization that I needed to perform to the best of my ability to show him that I was just such an incredible kid that he should be around more. To prove to him that I was a child worth his time, that I was worth his presence. I think part of that environment was fostered by the idea that he had very high expectations. He came up from a family that was raised on a ranch in the middle of nowhere in Mexico, and this is the norm. You provided your work. No one said good job. No one said they're there, and you did exactly what you were supposed to do. It's almost on the basis of stoicism, or these Stoic beliefs. Living by virtue in hard work or hardship is a reward in itself, so feedback isn't necessary. There's a lot of cultures living out in the sticks who live a very rural lifestyle that believe in such an idea. Everyone's just doing their part. You don't need a thank you, and you don't need positive reinforcement for doing so. Obviously, in American privileged cultures, well, we definitely disagree. But because that was the basis of my household and that was the basis of my environment, whether he knew that's what he was communicating or not, because let's be real, not a lot of words were shared, more actions, more observations than anything. Hardly any talks. Every interaction was a lesson. And if it didn't involve a lesson, what's the point of talking? Very brief explanation of things should I ask a question. But it was never nothing long, nothing really worth remembering besides a few conversations that still stick with me today. And so as I grew up on this performative analysis that I thought was right, when I hit my teen years, I started to ask more questions. Questions that led me astray because there wasn't any communication that provided any different answer than what I assumed because the answers weren't being met. It became less about what I could do that mattered, and it became more about, well, why does this matter anyways? Hence rebellion, acting out, being childish. No way to really channel those ideas, but I became more observant. There wasn't a lot of words and discussions. So a lot of it was just observations and actions, like I've been saying, until I started to go through my own struggle, until I started to go through my own failure. I started to fail. The second I left the coop, I failed. And I failed over and over and over again. And there was a lot of low points, a lot of moments of defeat, depression, a lot of areas where I started to see a very monstrous side of myself. Monstrous in the sense that suppressed and repressed anger carried over into all kinds of actions and behaviors. As I grew up, it all started to make sense. Now, keep in mind, this whole time, I thought I hated my dad. I thought I hated my upbringing. But the more I started to run through the paces, and the more I turned my defeats into lessons, the more I started to realize how resilient I actually was, how much I was so performative on the basis of expectation that I would get compliments and feedback by the world, regardless of how many times I failed, comparing me to other people. There's always this analysis that I was the best one there. And in the military, United States Army, it was also the case. Maybe I was the fastest person, the strongest person, the one with the best shot, moved the best, knew more about tactics. And I had this constant fuel of being performative. Now, it's very interesting that this is the outcome of my childhood. And the second I started to realize what my dad was necessarily doing, subconsciously or consciously, it created a mentality that I need to do my best and there is no other answer. Because at the time of being a child, if I failed, then I saw that as not being worth paid attention to. Kind of tough, but there's a lot of power in that as an adult. Now, you don't know it at the time, but you learn a lot about shame. And shame disgusted me. Shame disgusted me as a child because I thought it was something that if I failed, defeated, lost, then I was a child that didn't exist in my dad's eyes, that I didn't exist at all. And I hated that feeling. Now, as I grew up, I found out that I was just so damn high on conscientiousness that naturally these things will be disgusting to me. So, long story short, I have the best relationship with my dad than I ever have. And this all happened about 9 years ago, give or take, where I started to change that idea. And it all happened after my first deployment, where I endured quite a bit. And then I started to see what my dad was doing. His expectations were built on the best intention. His inability to communicate was his own insecurity as to him not having communications in his own past, in his own upbringing. He didn't think it mattered. It's not that he didn't know how, but he was fixated on the idea that showing you was better than telling you. Not much of a language barrier there. I knew Spanish as a kid. I spoke it all the time. But when it came down to him showing me, he always thought that was more important. This is my love. Let me show you everything. But the thing is that when it came down to my own defeats and failures, the idea that I mattered less was stuck in my own head. It's not because he actually believed that. That was honestly just a depiction of what I felt that label was entitled to. I say that to say this. Concepts of failing is purely based on our perception of it. If we want a loss to be a defeat, then it will be a defeat and we will remain defeated. We will be a defeated person. But that's not what indicates who we are. I think that labels have played a very nasty part in reference to what it is to be a man. Strong man, tough man, wise man, smart man, fighting man, whatever. Truth is, fuck all these labels. These labels are nothing but little bullshit, insecure imprisonments that we've had for God knows how long. And I know that there's a few examples where labels can provide some form of benefit and an orientation to what we're trying to achieve. So we label our path, but we don't label who we are. And I find that very interesting because the type of people that use labels the most are often the most regressive. And it makes sense because if I can trap you by this, well, I'm going to be able to cripple what you're capable of, cripple how you think. I don't think that's ever the beneficial move. I don't think that's ever a great move. Labels have landed us in these terrible positions. If we believe that we are smart and we use the label of smart, then we're going to continue to act on the behavior of what is smart, being so fearful of enacting a behavior that isn't smart. Same thing for tough. Same thing for strong. Same thing for wise. Same thing for what a manly thing is supposed to be. Dumb as shit. We got to understand that if we imprison ourselves on the basis of these labels, then we will always be imprisoned by the behaviors that feel that they reinforce them. The more that we reinforce these, the less inclined we are to pursue failure. The more scared we are of failure. Because if you're a smart person, label, you're never going to behave with a possible outcome of not being deemed smart. You're only going to answer the questions that you know, that you're confident in. You're only going to pursue the paths that you're confident in because these reinforce the bias. These reinforce the label. And I think that this drifts us so far away from the idea of failing that we give less opportunity of it ever happening because we only pursue the actions that reinforce these labels. And I don't think that's the move. I think we need to throw that shit away. And I think we need to fail. Now, naturally, there's so many people out there that perceive failure in all kinds of ways. It is definitely a spectrum of the word, but I think it is very similar to how we perceive judgment. How many people out there negatively perceive judgment, even though it was never a negative word? It's a neutral word. So is failure. And I think that people who have failed the most doesn't indicate whether they're good or bad. The question is, what did you do with it? Because if I failed a lot and I kept failing, and there was all manners of behaviors that I enacted after these failures, well, that's going to indicate whether I'm a good or bad person. Now, let's say that I fail and I fail again, and I fail in the repetitious manner without changing anything about what I'm doing. Naturally, we call that insanity. What happens if I change? What happens if my failures look less like failures? And what happens if each failure is a lesser failure than the one before? We're learning. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that a lot of men are so scared of losing sight of what they perceive their label is, or to the point where they're scared of being perceived even less than they currently are. Maybe they have low self-esteem, and they're very insecure. Any additional failure might just break them, shatter them. They can't afford it, or at least that's what their soul tells them. But that's not the case. And I think that changing our perspective on the concept of failure is going to enlighten our ability to be able to pursue something that might not feel good at the time, but it's because it is a crude feeling that leads to something greater. I think concepts of failure and judgment kind of walk hand in hand with one another. We fail, and whether we judge it ourselves or are judged by others, we need to stand by our own personal judgments a little more. Realize that, hey, this was an honest attempt. This is what we learned. Now let's try this and see what happens. And then I think that form of openness can often cultivate a mentality that's worth keeping. And I see a lot of people trying to discuss the idea of what men should do, how men should be, which kind of leads us to the idea of June, men's mental health. I know it's Pride Month too, but I don't really give a shit about it. And I have love and respect for everybody for that matter. It's just, this is the priority today. So let's try to stick to that and not get insecure about where we think we matter. And I think on the basis of all these men trying to discuss what they think men should be, women included, it's all bullshit. It's all bullshit. We all have a biological inheritance. Environmental context can really sweep us off our feet at times. But the only way that we can really form ourselves, I would say, independently, is failure. And I think the second that we stop being afraid of such a concept, the more likely we'll be enlightened towards something that we can learn. The only difference is how do we turn that failure into something that's beneficial? That's not something that was automatic to me either. Boy, I have definitely tussled in the dirt before I realized there was a purpose. And I was so afraid of defeat, so afraid of looking like something that I wasn't, or I thought that I wasn't, that it just completely halted anything that I wanted to pursue. Didn't even give things a chance. Because if I looked any kind of stupid, well, that's not what a smart person does. That's not what a wise person does. No. Why take the chance? Why look like the person that doesn't understand? Because I perceived that as being stupid. If you don't understand, you're stupid. And I was caught in that for a long time until I had to break out of my own consistencies to realize that I was failing and I wasn't learning because I didn't have the label to learn. I didn't have the personality that wanted to learn. And so I would just get frustrated at the fact that I was failing in an area that I thought I was confident, hit a wall, and realized when you get to walls, you got to climb. You can't just go through it. I kept trying to go through it. No, this is going to work because this is what smart people do. This is what strong people do. No, I needed to change my ways and I needed to elevate, transcend, become something more, right? And in the behalf of that kind of lesson, I learned and did more with it. I mean, it was a form of ego death. There was this belief I had about myself that I thought these labels taught me that I was capable of, so I didn't question anything I was doing as wrong. I didn't question any of my movements or my processes as something to re-engage or think about and to think about critically. And so because I was built on these things, if it ain't broke, don't fix it until, well, it's not working. And I didn't think that these systems were broken until I kept failing. I guess that's kind of where the frustration came from, but that frustration led me to the idea, well, if I'm going to keep moving, maybe I need to take a closer look. And that didn't happen the first time. It took several times in order for me to engage that kind of process. So don't be so upset if it doesn't happen immediately for you. It happens eventually. Sometimes you just have to keep crashing until those lessons actually be ways to avoid crashing. People like the idea of tying what makes us immature to our maturity. I disagree. I think we need to understand that we're not always going to be at the places that we want to be. And we also need to understand that we're not the gender that people typically care for. No one's going to do this for us. And I know that the pick yourself up by your bootstraps crap is one of those things that we don't want to hear because it's like it's that red pill idea of realistic movement. The idea that you need to accrue this on your own and there's no excuses. And you need to realize that if you want to be perceived as an attractive person or attractive man, then you're going to have to accrue some success because this is how women operate. This is how the world operates. This is how society operates. And you don't mean anything unless you have credibility or value or success behind your name. But I think the measure of that success and the measure of that in itself is often misconstrued, that it needs to be some incredible amount when it doesn't. I think there's levels of humble pursuits that can find their own fulfillment. And I think it's been that way historically. But the issue is that we have the integration of technology with this concept of comparative analysis to other people and other men. And we see these top 1% and we think, well, okay, we got to be something close to them, not realizing that the other 99% are trying to do the same thing. It's just that this is all we see. This is just something that's spotlighted. It's not real. I think this kind of comparative analysis has pushed the mean to such an extent where it almost seems like, what's the point of trying? And it seems like it's too much of a route. So what's the point of having that kind of purpose? It's kind of that. What's the point of having that kind of drive if it's so impossible? And if I'm going to be perceived in some failing way the whole time, why? I think the end point doesn't need to be specific. Stop using these forms and these other people as your route. You're you. So be you. You're not them. And there's no stroke of luck that's really going to change that. Regardless of that luck, you're still you. And just because you're not them doesn't mean that you're less because you're not. You're you, man. And you're the only you that exists on this planet. So you better find some kind of value in that. And I think there's too many messages out there telling you where to go, telling you who to be. And there's not enough messages out there telling you what's in the way of finding you. Before you start moving and before you even come to the decision of who you should be. Small little incremental difference, but you'd be surprised how far we can get with a broken car thinking we're going to go the whole way. We got some stuff to get in order first, I think. And I think that's my overall message today. So much love and respect to all the men out there, to the fathers, and happy June month to everybody. I spent quite a bit of time talking. Sorry if it bored y'all, but I'll be looking forward to y'all's comments in the comment section down below. Go ahead, hit me with some stories, man. Hit me with something. Hit me with what you think about this month and what you think about life in today's society overall. I'll definitely be looking forward to it. Thanks again. And I'll go ahead. See you next time.